what you choose to do to make a living doesn't define you. And so the most important thing to remember is that it's the journey that's important.
On this episode, I was privileged and honored to have a wide-ranging conversation with my two brothers, Peter and Chris. Collectively, the three of us have 85 plus years of experience formally in education as teachers and administrators, and we covered topics from Waldorf education to academic rigor to the role of love and spirituality in education, should those exist or not. We had some laughs along the way. We even dropped some names of the most influential teachers that have been formative in our lives. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it in La Ventana, Mexico, Baja California Sur. Welcome to the Superintendent's Hangout, where we discuss topics in education, charter schools, life in general, and not necessarily in that order. I'm your host, Dr. Sciarretta. Come on in and hang out. Welcome, Pete and Chris. Thank you for coming and hanging out on the Superintendent's Hangout for a little bit this fine evening in La Ventana, Mexico. This episode is going to be a little more focused on career and education and experience and philosophy than the other one that we recorded. That's also going to air on this podcast. But doesn't mean we can't take some sideways detours into to our upbringing and other things. But I'm going to try to keep this a little more focused on career stuff. You guys ready to go?
Let's do it.
Yep.
All right, rock and roll. I'd like to start out where Terry Gross always starts out, with a very simple question that's not always an easy question, and it is, tell me about yourself. So let's narrow that a little bit and tell me about yourself in relation to education, and specifically from an educator standpoint. So whoever wants to take that first. Because collectively we have about 85 years of experience in formal education as practitioners in one capacity or another. And so, Chris, why don't we start with you, and you can tell us about your 25 years or so and what that looked like, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So my primary interest has always been the natural world. And as a child, I spent as much time as I could outside, in the woods, in the creek, by our house, exploring. And I always figured I would go into science in some form. I had a dream of being a marine biologist. And I continued with that into my own schooling, and majored in biology in college, and found myself going to education after college. It just felt like a natural fit. I had been camp counselor and worked with young people in various settings.
Tell us a little bit. Yeah, tell us about that. I know you worked at an outdoor school in the near San Diego, right? Near Hemet?
That's right, yeah. In Mountain Center, California. And I also worked in Massachusetts as an outdoor educator. So that was right after college. And did that for a little while, and then ended up in Japan teaching English, conversational English, for a little over a year, and then came back to the States and went back to school for my master's degree in conservation biology. I thought that would lead me out of education, but it never really happened. I found myself coming back to education once again, and this time worked my way up to teaching high school science in a private school in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I did that up until this past year. And so my journey to that was not perfectly straight. And, I did other things in between, but it was always working with young people in an educational setting of some kind. And now I'm at a place where I'm not sure if I will continue with education, at least not in a school setting, but I can't imagine that I won't go back to some form of education, but it's hard for me to know what the future will bring, which is kind of exciting, actually.
Yeah, it's a liberating thing. Pete and I were just talking about that a little bit. What lessons have you drawn from the creek, or as our stepdad would call it, the crick, that ran near our house, Hungry Hollow Road? Shout out to Spring Valley, then became Chestnut Ridge. But I remember as a kid, you were always any free moment. I actually remember summer jobs. We would be, we all worked summer jobs, and one of your criteria was it had to be outdoors. And so, what lessons, what through threads have you brought from those days 4 or more decades ago, all the way up through master's degree, and then Japan, which must have been a different experience, and then to the present?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first thing that comes to mind is being able to become so familiar with a natural environment and its inhabitants that you just feel like you know it intimately and it's almost part of you. And being able to know what that feels like, be familiar with that, and take that into other aspects of your life, into other natural environments, and maybe not so natural environments, but that's sort of a touchstone going forward in your life. It was for me.
How do you handle or think about this phenomenon of romanticizing the natural world? So, if we look at how people interact with the natural world now, let's just say in the United States, there's a lot of selfies. There's a lot of, that brown bear is so cute. That elk is, oh my gosh, look how beautiful it is. If I could only just get this much closer, I could get an even better photo. I can't imagine, hunting. I can't imagine all these things. There's this romanticizing that happens, and the natural world is unsentimental or non-sentimental. I don't know what the word is, and fierce. Right? Here we're recording and we're on the Sea of Cortez in Baja, and this morning as we went down the beach, there's carcasses of animals. Fish and different things, and one fish eating another fish, and birds eating that fish, and it's not. There's nothing sentimental about it. It is really survival of the fittest. And I think there was somewhere in literature they talk about the tooth and the claw, and that's what the natural world is. How do you bring that understanding to your students, but also have them have an appreciation for and a love for and a stewardship for nature? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So that last piece is the most important. It's the connection, and over romanticizing nature is a sign of our disconnection with it. And so trying to foster that connection, starting with an interest in learning about the natural world is really the key. So E.O. Wilson, the famous entomologist, he coined this concept of biophilia, which is an innate love for all living things that we humans have. And I don't think anybody can argue that we don't have this. This is why we keep pets. This is why we have plants in our homes, and why
we follow cats on Instagram or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And this is why the shape of, a palm leaf is beautiful to us. So we have this because we are part of the natural world. Everything in it we need. If spiders, this is something that comes from the world of entomology as well, that entomologists say, and believe this fully, even though it's incredibly difficult to fathom, this fact that if spiders were to disappear today, all humans would be gone within 1 month off the face of the earth. And this is...
Whoa.
Yeah.
We're going to pause
Hold on.
on that. Whoa.
Yeah.
I think I just stepped on a spider walking in here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
There's a spider in my
That
cup.
happens, and,
My cup
we
of
have
coffee
to,
has a spider.
sometimes get rid of them from places they shouldn't be. But spiders...
Because
are
of the whole
only one-
chain of...
Yeah, exactly. Wow. So spiders are incredibly important keystone species, and we don't realize it, but they're helping to control insect populations. Insects are they are the most successful group of organisms the world has ever seen. And if they're not controlled, everything would just fall apart. And we so easily think we're superior. We think we're separate.
At the
We think we can control things, but we can only control things so much. And we are fully dependent on all the things around us in the natural world, as insignificant as we have come to think they are. So, just understanding this and understanding how we are all connected and understanding how ecosystems work is really, really important for students at the high school level in particular.
And so how do you foment that, or how do you cultivate that in students who, due to no fault of their own, but a lot of their connection to nature, even at the food end is from the supermarket. They're not even seeing, they're kids who don't know where eggs come from, right? Or same with vegetables and there's a real disconnect there. And how do you take? I understand in an outdoor school where kids are sent to your outdoor school because it's something that sixth grade camp is part of the curriculum or what have you, and they spend 5 days and they go walk around the woods and do night hikes and pick up owl scat and all that stuff.
Yeah.
That there's value in that, but how do you do that more comprehensively and globally, and not only with students but also with adults, like within the school community?
Yeah, well, I haven't really worked with adults.
But you have colleagues, right? Like, so how do they,
Yeah. I mean, with the students, I took every opportunity to teach classes outdoors, where it's easier to see the things you're talking about. I taught a course every year in which we followed the Santa Fe River from not its source exactly, but near its source up in the mountains outside of Santa Fe down to its confluence with the Rio Grande, and studied different habitats along the river, as well as different ways in which humans were impacting the environment. Sources of water supply for Santa Fe. We would visit the wastewater treatment plant that's along the river, and get a tour of the facility. Sometimes visited the Buckman direct diversion plant, which pulls water from the Rio Grande to supplement the needs of Santa Fe and things like that. So that was one course, but in many others, I tried to take the students outside as much as possible. And also, there's so many wonderful things written about the natural world, so many great writers, scientists who have really gone deep into the ecology of different areas. And so I would bring as much of the really good writing to the students and just snippets of books. And we would always read Silent Spring. Rachel Carson's work, which most people credit with beginning the environmental movement, actually, even though there were things happening before that. That's really what kickstarted it. And still today, people will credit her with that. So, just basically trying to expose the students to as much as possible that's relevant, and some of it would really click, or that's the hope.
Yeah, that's in a second, Pete, I'm going to hop to you on that same question. But before that, Chris, how do you think about and deal with this notion that environmental stewardship or being an environmentalist is a left-wing, liberal, tree hugger, crunchy, wear Birkenstocks and shower very sparsely kind of a thing? You know what I'm talking about, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
And how do you address that in a way that all students and people from all backgrounds can appreciate, this notion of stewardship and connection to nature?
Yeah, that's a tough one because it's really a political problem instead of an environmental problem. And the students, high school students, don't see it that way at all.
Right.
Every high school student through an ecology course in 11th grade, let's say, that's where I taught an ecology course in the curriculum. Every 11th grade student will come to a place where they see the importance of environmental work. And it's only later on when, unfortunately, we do get jaded. Our lives change, our priorities change. Money becomes a really big thing that everybody worries about. The economy becomes the most important thing, and people forget, I think, quite honestly. So it's about, I guess, reminding people. Everybody depends on
spiders.
Everybody depends on spiders. Everybody depends on a healthy watershed, right? If there's no clean water to drink, that doesn't only impact people on the left. So and actually, because the economic side is the most impactful, that's usually where things happen, when people realize the economic side of things. That's why ecotourism, for instance, has been really successful in some places. Once people realize that the natural resources are super valuable in a monetary sense, as well as the ecosystem services that you can't monetize, then things start to improve.
Shout out to Costa Rica.
That's right.
And other places.
Totally. And just with swimming, I mean, the idea of swimming with the fishes, when we grew up in New Jersey, we thought that was different with The Sopranos than what swimming with the fishes is.
We actually grew up in New York, but that's okay.
Oh, that's right.
Close to the border.
Stone's throw.
Right.
Stone's throw.
Right. Yeah.
I was waiting when the jokes were going to start. So thank you, Chris, for that thoughtful response. And Pete, I'm going to ask you the same question to tell us where you come from in an educational and from an educator sense.
Yeah. So I come from New York, not New Jersey. In an environmental sense. But so my passion was to be a teacher. And when I was in middle school, that's all I wanted to do. And I realized that. I completed college and then went ahead and jumped into a classroom in Akron, Ohio, which is a city where the sort of, we all know it for LeBron James now, but
And tires.
right? Tires preceded LeBron.
Yeah.
And so kind of the cultural and success of the city had left with the tire industry that moved overseas. So it was pretty economically, depressed place to be. Anyway, started at a Waldorf school there.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt
go
you.
ahead.
We're going to come back to the Waldorf topic a little bit later, because this has been peppered throughout a number of my episodes, and we'll come back to Waldorf education more thoroughly in a minute. So yeah, okay. Continue.
Okay, so I completed, so I was there for 2 years in Akron, Ohio, during which time I entered a Waldorf teacher training course that ran over 3 years. And then following that, I relocated to New Jersey, Princeton, New Jersey, which is where I also joined a Waldorf school there, K through 8, and spent my next 17 years really kind of getting thoroughly, deeply entrenched in education. And that was on the East Coast, of course. And then from there, moved to Santa Fe in 2013 and also joined a Waldorf school community, the Santa Fe Waldorf School then. And that was my journey. So the only time I was teaching in a non-Waldorf setting was when I was taking college courses, which were limited in my junior and senior year of college.
So I want to talk a little bit in more depth about Waldorf education. The episode where our mom, Kay Hoffman, where she talked about Waldorf education, she gives kind of more of a history. And clearly this is something that's kind of filtered, or I should say entrenched in our family to various degrees. We all attended Waldorf schools, and most of our children have as well, et cetera, across the four of us in our family. I'll put this to you, Pete, before we get to Chris. If you could encapsulate, you're in an elevator and you're wearing a shirt that says Waldorf on it, and people are like, "Oh, the salad." No, actually, no. "Oh, the expensive hotel." What's your answer before you get to the 50th floor of the hotel? What do you like? Why Waldorf for you, career-wise, first of all?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we're going up.
We're going up. Ding, ding, ding.
Waldorf.
4th floor.
The reason I chose Waldorf education was because it had given me a platform through the development of capacities within myself and a multifaceted approach to the world that gave me confidence and hope in human beings and
10th floor.
and moving forward. So the idea of developing capacities rather than filling kind of an empty jar, empty vessel was it brought me in, pulled me in, and was something I wanted to then give to others through my work in education. So that's why Waldorf education. And ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding. You have arrived at the presidential suite. Except
Waldorf Astoria.
It's in the
Motel 6.
Motel 6. You're on the 6th floor of the Motel 6. Chris, what about you? Why Waldorf?
Well, for me, I guess it was maybe a little bit different because I never thought I was going into education throughout my college years. And then again, in my graduate studies. So, sometimes, we think, oh, you make a career choice. We use those words, and sometimes things just happen and you go with it. And I feel like that's how it was for me. The Waldorf community was really familiar. It felt really good. And I enjoyed working there. The teaching was always challenging and interesting, and always required flexibility on my part, and the students were really wonderful. So that's why I did it, and it was a positive experience in that way. In terms of my own children, who I did send to the Waldorf school for several years, if you ask that question, why Waldorf, I could just see that it was a good environment for them. And, there are always pros and cons to any situation. And there were in the Waldorf school, at least in our particular Waldorf school, for my kids. But I could tell that it was healthy for them. And it was, they were allowed to be kids. They were allowed to be kids. And, we know how precious childhood is. And when we push students in certain ways that don't allow them to be truly kids at the particular age that they are, I think that's really sad. So, Waldorf tries to bring the appropriate setting, the appropriate teaching style, learning style, appropriate experiences, the appropriate stories, pictures, everything at the particular age that the students are, at the particular developmental stage that they are. That's kind of at the center of it. Knowing what is appropriate, that's the difficulty, perhaps. But that's what Waldorf schools have been trying to do all these years.
So you both talked about what you hope to see. Pete, you talked consciously about a choice, and you were trained as a Waldorf teacher. Chris, yours was more perhaps the career chose you as opposed to the other way around. Mm-hmm. And we could, go on about other benefits to the education. What do you think is something that you believe that needs to change in Waldorf education going forward? This isn't meant to be a criticism, but rather a constructive idea, thoughts about education in the future. Because I have a number of them, but I don't want to throw those out there yet. I want to see what you guys have to say.
Yeah, well, I think that's a totally appropriate question, because we know that there are issues, and the Santa Fe Waldorf School
is
recently,
no more.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it closed its doors in August, and that is why I no longer am a Waldorf teacher, or a teacher at all at this point. And so there are a number of things. I think the biggest is proper leadership that has been lacking in a lot of Waldorf schools, and was in particular in our school, the Santa Fe Waldorf School.
Is there a structural reason for that, like in general in Waldorf schools, that makes it distinct from perhaps traditional public schools or a Catholic school or something?
Yeah, there are. I think there are things that Waldorf schools have in common, and then there are of course lots of differences between the schools. But one commonality is that a lot of Waldorf schools are trying to work off of a model, or they think they're working off of a model established, 100 years ago, and when the first Waldorf school was started, and
in 1919.
Yeah. So, and models have to change because times change, people change, organizations change, and so that, I think that's part of it. But also just this belief. I mean, in Waldorf education, when things become entrenched, and then there's like a blind, what's the right word? It's just a blind following of a particular idea, and everybody thinks that's the way it has to be, when that idea was just one of many that was tried out in former times in the past, then you have a problem. And especially when nobody knows why.
Do you have a specific example of that?
Yeah. So Pete will know about this more, but a specific example is that the consensus model of decision-making had to be the only one used in a Waldorf school. And so this was an idea that was brought at some point by somebody somewhere in a Waldorf school, and it came from the Quaker movement.
Correct.
And then this caught on, and so Waldorf schools, people at Waldorf schools thought that this was the only way. And
So like in a faculty meeting or something?
in a
until it
faculty
was
meeting,
100%?
yeah, and also the idea that the faculty would run the school. I mean, I think that's that statement can be misconstrued. It can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, and I think it was taken to the extreme in a lot of schools where only the teachers could make the decisions, and every decision had to be taken to the teachers. And there are a lot of different ways that the teachers can be involved in, quote unquote, running the school without having to be in control of every decision. So those are just a couple examples.
Pete, what do you think? Either about that or just in general, something that you'd like to see change or think needs to change in the future?
Yeah. So good. Well, that's the good question. I would say first and foremost, we need accredited and competent teacher training facilities for Waldorf teachers. We need to be able to develop capable, well-educated teachers to go into the Waldorf teaching force. Unfortunately, I think what has happened all too often is that there's been a shortage of Waldorf teachers, and so the teacher training facilities for Waldorf education accept anybody who walks through the door. And then there's not necessarily a stringent enough process through which those teachers who are not competent or shouldn't be in front of students are weeded out. Therefore, anybody who's willing is able to enter the classroom. I saw that in Ohio, I saw that in New Jersey, and I saw that in New Mexico, where incompetent teachers, very willing, wonderful human beings, got in the classroom and they had no business going there. And just a quick tie-in was we experienced in our educational situation at the Waldorf school that we attended, Green Meadow Waldorf School in Spring Valley, also Chestnut Ridge, New York, that some of the teachers were brilliant, capable, dynamic, but were not actually trained educators and or were not good teachers. So that information that needs to go from teacher to student and the dynamic and relationship between student and teacher has to be solid. And then there needs to be a way to vet that, like I said, in practice as well. And because we have this consensus model, also, you don't necessarily have enough of a top-down situation going on where people are weeded out, and then sentimentality, like you were speaking about with nature, sentimentality comes in and you realize, oh, this person's striving, they're a really good, kind human being, and they don't end up leaving the classroom of when they should, but instead things just get worse and worse and usually come to a head. So I'd say poorly educated teachers and facilities going in. We have the structural leadership issue. And then also there's some cultural elements as well. And just a quick one is, why does a Waldorf school have to have, the aesthetics be less than par, or the functionality of a campus be less than par? Why not invest in the infrastructure of the actual school to create an environment of positivity and beauty and functionality for everyone involved? Now, we had a beautiful school in Santa Fe, but there was also a lot that could have been done to make people feel more welcomed, and for it not to appear to be different than what expectations were, especially when families are paying hefty tuition.
I have a lot of questions about, well, thank you both for that commentary. I have a lot of questions about academic rigor. We'll get there a little bit later. Equity and access for a cross-section of society that can't afford tuition. We'll talk about that. But I want to ask you a question about spirituality. So, a lot of Catholic schools, for example, nowadays, as opposed to 50 years ago, they're not taught by priests and nuns, right? It's lay persons, and they may be Catholic, they may not, they may be practicing or not. Waldorf education has a spiritual underpinning, and that was at its founding, in the person of Rudolf Steiner and anthroposophy. What do you guys see as the role, if any, of that in today's Waldorf schools? And is it even important in the future? And then the second part of that is, are there challenges to having that be part of a school community that may seem weird or off-putting, or may attract families to the school for things other than a quality education? So there's kind of two parts to that. What's the role? And then should it even be that way? And what are some of the impacts? So anthroposophy. And don't worry about if you're going to get canceled by the North American Anthroposophical Society.
What about Zagutianum?
So it may happen. And it's just, if this is education about freedom, part of freedom means being able to talk about things. So they can email me. So Pete, why don't you take that?
Yeah, boy. So challenges definitely exist. That was also an attractant, I believe, for people to attend the Waldorf school. The element of a spiritual impulse that was present, recognized, accepted in the school. Although it's not religious per se.
Yeah, right.
There is the element of spirituality. And, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent here, but I always think of, our legal tenders, all the money we have in our wallet, at least in the U.S., says "In God We Trust." Right? So we're using legal tender that actually has "In God We Trust" written on it. Nobody has a problem with that as long as they have enough money in their pocket, right? We have the element. I always say that there's this. The idea is that there's an invisible element, which you can call it the life force, whatever you want to, right? And I always kind of make the analogy of love, actually. Not lots of little heart with your two hands, that kind of stuff, but the true love that we have for each other, life, so on and so forth, that's actually an invisible force. But it is powerful, probably more powerful than anything. And we all know it exists, but you can't see it. And it's there. So I like to say that there's an invisible force, which is the spiritual reality of human beings that exists. And so that is alive and recognized as being present in each human being. It's not tied to religion, but that it is something more than what we can actually see or sense with our 5 or 12 senses. And that, I think, is wonderful because we trust in that impulse to be present in the lives of the children and an aid to them as well. And through pictures and wisdom passed on through narratives from thousands of years, some of those pictures come to life and then can be taken up by students in their own way as individuals throughout their entire lives. So that's how I see it. Does it have a place in Waldorf education? Absolutely. Is it tricky? Yes. Is there dogma that comes in because of it? Yes. Will it last down the road? I don't know. You can't rely on the spiritual impulse of the students or in life to do the teaching for you, and that's not enough, right? You can't default to that as let the spiritual world take care of that. That doesn't work in education or in life, actually. We have to participate more than that. But it does exist, and it's a really tricky one. I'll stop there.
Okay. Chris?
Yeah, I agree that, I guess you didn't say this exactly, Pete, but I think that to answer the first part of your question, Dave, that spiritual impulse does have to be there. It does have to remain in the Waldorf school if it's truly a Waldorf school. But I do see a lot of problems. One of them being that if you look more broadly at anthroposophy, which is the belief system that Rudolf Steiner created.
Right? Yeah.
It's not just spirituality, but it's specifically esoteric Christianity, and so that does present a problem sometimes. If schools were to just focus on the spiritual component, as Pete described, that's more universal. And when people dig a little bit and they find that, this is connected to specifically Christianity, it's esoteric Christianity, then there can be a problem. And also, you have very cultish aspects as well, having to do, connected with anthroposophy. And so
In schools?
Sometimes in schools, not as much in schools, but it can get there because it's something that's a part of anthroposophy. I feel like, or has been spawned by it, or exists around it.
Like the only ideas that ring true are ideas that came from one philosopher 100 years ago, translated from German from 100 years ago through multiple translators to the present and interpreted by scholars or whoever. And
Right. That those aren't just ideas to explore, but those are facts. That everything that Steiner said is a fact, and not just maybe a spiritual path, right? So I think when we read, let's say, we read about Buddhism, I don't think most people take every word that exists as a fact of, a universal fact. It's a way of seeing things, and so that's I think been an issue, particularly with the older generation of Waldorf teachers. And I don't know, maybe I'm jaded, and maybe I would be better off having faith in those things that's fact, because there are people who don't question those things and just take everything that Steiner said as fact. And, maybe there's a wonderful freedom in that too. But, I see it as problems, and, how it manifests in a school is going to be really unclear. I mean, it's going to be coming up in different ways. And I think in my experience, I could never speak my full mind about things because
You mean as a teacher?
as a teacher, I could never, because it was just sort of accepted that everything that Steiner said was a truth, and it was not up for discussion. When actually, from what I know, from what I've heard, Rudolf Steiner, that wasn't Steiner's thing. He wanted everybody to discuss things. He wanted everything to be talked about, worked through, thought about, and explored. It wasn't about
Dogma.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Do you have any concrete examples? I mean, I'm assuming it has something probably related to the sciences, because you're a pretty methodical, scientific thinker. And I know we had a conversation. We've been talking about, I've lately been exploring some breathing exercises and Wim Hof breathing, and we were talking about whether it's really possible to alkalize. Is that a word?
Alkalize.
Alkalize to make alkaline your body.
Yeah.
Right. And you were saying actually scientifically, it's probably by deep breathing a few times and holding your breath, that's probably not doing anything on that level that's being claimed to be, but maybe it has some other effects. You feel good, you feel different. And so, you and I were thinking that through, and you're way better versed in that than I am. But do you have any examples of something? Is it something that would come up in a staff meeting or and you'd be thinking to yourself, that's not borne out by the facts, but everyone's going, oh yeah. And the fourth lecture on knowledge of the higher worlds, there's this, it's got to be.
It wasn't so much in my teaching. Actually, it wasn't in my teaching at all, because in a Waldorf high school, the teachers should be free to teach. And I felt I was, and I did never feel like I had to do anything that somebody was saying is the way to do it in a Waldorf school. I was entrusted to teach biology, and that's what I tried to do. So it wasn't in the teaching, but it was more more in faculty meetings, in college meetings, just the understanding that I don't, it was never spoken, but I felt like if I spoke up with some challenges with Steiner's ideas, let's say, or something we were reading, or just ideas of how things were done in a Waldorf school, if I was really challenging some of these things, that I would have kind of been, I mean, I don't, now the word canceled is kind of crazy to use, but in effect, that I would be sort of canceled or deemed unsuited to be a teacher in a Waldorf school, actually.
It sounds like there's a risk of groupthink, as there is in anything. And I think I'm not a trained Waldorf teacher. I have not studied anthroposophy. I don't have any interest in studying it, but I know that as a student who did 12 years in Waldorf school and then gone on in my life, that this idea that Albert Einstein espoused, I think he did. Well, there's a bunch of quotes that are attributed to him that he never said. So I don't know if this is really him, but the key thing is to never stop questioning. And so, I think when the questioning stops in any system and anywhere, you stop asking the challenging questions, then you can slide into that, the group think, and eventually you're part of the problem. So I feel like, I appreciate both of you, bringing up, I appreciate you bring up the cultish piece, because this isn't to suggest that everyone who's an anthroposophist is in a cult. But I want to pivot a little bit or reflect on the fact that spiritual indications that were given 100 years ago in Western Europe by almost entirely white Europeans in a world at a time when the world was much less integrated, when Europe was much less racially integrated than it is today, and certainly the United States as well. How do those indications flash forward to 2023 and beyond in terms of being able to address the needs of a really diverse society? Or do you think Waldorf schools will continue to be kind of in this primarily white niche, white upper middle class, or people who can pay, and maybe that's where they're going to be doomed to remain? Like, private schools can determine who attends and who doesn't. It's not just having the money. There's an interview process, and I know the teacher has a lot of power in determining who comes into the school and who's in their grade, et cetera. Who also people can leave. They can be asked to leave. So there's that dynamic that happens in a private setting that doesn't happen. 90 some odd % of kids in America are in public schools, right? That's where most of them get their learning, and you teach whoever comes in the door. How do you think about that diversity, multiculturalism, meeting the needs of every kid, whether it's ethnically, linguistically, but also like special learning needs, special education, all that stuff in a Waldorf school? What's been your experience, and where do you think it goes in the future? I know that's a big, multifaceted question. It's the diversity question, diversity in all senses of the word.
Yeah, I guess I'll just say a little that, first of all, I guess the Waldorf school movement as a whole, right, spans, I don't know how many countries, but quite a few, maybe 50. And I think there's over 1,000 Waldorf schools worldwide. And those Waldorf schools are in a variety of settings, right? Multiple languages. So, whatever's going on in our neck of the woods or in the U.S. Right now we're in Mexico, and there's Waldorf schools all over Mexico as well. Those schools are hopefully bringing the richness of the culture, the language, and the social norms, et cetera, into those schools and creating community through that, wherever they happen to be. I certainly hope that's the case. And so I think that's really, really important.
Were Steiner's ideas relevant for a multicultural, diverse population?
Good. Excellent question. So I would say yes, when actually fully understood and applied properly, yes. In the context that they were given, it was a very small slice of the populace, like you said. But that needs to then be taken and applied in other settings. And I think that comes down to sort of the human resources. And again, the counterpoint questions, and not taking something verbatim as it was given and then applying it dogmatically, or, well, this is what it was, so we're going to try this here. It's the round peg through a square hole. You have to find a way to make it relevant. And that's up to the leadership. That's up to the training facilities. That's up to the teachers in the specific communities. That's up to the parents who support those specific communities, and so on and so forth. And through those means, through those methods, I guess I should say, you can make it relevant, but it needs to be really, really understood. And I don't think that it has been adequately enough, but I have had the privilege of seeing Waldorf schools in other countries, and it looks different. So that was nice to see. I would say that the architecture still has a very similar feel and is identifiable because of its uniqueness. I would say that's a commonality.
Like no right angles and
correct.
So just as an asterisk, if you can Google Waldorf schools architecture and probably see examples from around the world. But I think that was a Rudolf Steiner indication about because he had indications on medicine and architecture and education and you name it.
Right. Agriculture.
Yeah. So I think there's a even font actually. It seems like there's been a writing font that seems to be, I'm sure now it's digital, but in Waldorf schools all around the world. So it's an interesting thing that's something that would carry to this day, 100 plus years into the future.
And so my understanding about the font quickly is that, so in the Goetheanum, which is the center built for anthroposophy in Europe, that the chiseling, when the work in the material and the natural material that they were using was done with a series of straight lines, like a chisel and hammer.
Oh, instead of a curve.
Correct. And so because of that, it was a series of parallel lines to create the letters, which was then again repeated many, many times. So it didn't necessarily, it could have been.
It wasn't Rudolf Steiner saying, and I am thinking that the letters must be many herky-jerky little angles.
I don't think so. So even something like that carries on till now, and it's something that signs. Luckily, the Santa Fe Waldorf School sign was not that. It
was just Courier 12-point font.
That was all the sign maker knew how to apply. So, but anyway, so I think that's something. So, I just wanted to do a quick follow-up point, if I could, about the other idea about the authenticity or the dogma and that sort of thing. That when you're in a Waldorf community, I think as a teacher, there are those people who hold on to their picture of what Waldorf education should be, which is normal. And then you figure it out. But again, that's through study, that's through point, counterpoint. And, this little analogy came to mind when you were speaking, Chris and Dave. That is when you get a new student who comes to your class, and I've introduced, hundreds of students coming in. The one ingredient that I think is the most important for like a seamless integration into the class and social harmony, so on and so forth, there's always going to be some bumps, is authenticity. Like that student has to be who they look like. They can't come in and act like one thing and really be something else, because that's like kind of a form of dishonesty that students don't accept. And then it's really hard for them to kind of get on even footing. I think that same thing for faculty members, right? You want to come in, you want to do your best, you want to strive. But if you're somebody who uses language that is colorful, if that's something you decide to do, if you have a certain way of being, then that shouldn't be squelched. You should be allowed to express yourself, again, as a counterpoint. And can be an expectation of a certain way of being, holier than thou even sometimes, that is carried through. And if you're not that somehow you're not doing the work. And those two have really not too much to do with each other. So the idea that exists is not great. And just a little anecdote I was at a training in California, in Sacramento, way back in the day, probably 20 years ago. And somebody came up to me and said, oh, you're a experienced Waldorf teacher. Can I ask you a question? I said, sure, go ahead. And she said, so I heard that if you have a bad thought, that thought is real and that the children will feel that. And I'm worried because I have many bad thoughts and I don't know if I should be a teacher. And I said, you should absolutely be a teacher. What the beep are you talking about? And she kind of looked at me like, this guy's crazy.
But do I have to beep out beeps on this show?
Maybe. Anyway, that's an idea of some of the people attracted to this form of education.
So I want to talk about that, not the beep, but so I think about this a lot, like it, overarching philosophies, paradigms, modes of thinking, whether it's religiously based, whether it's something like, in my experience, International Baccalaureate, which is also a framework and a paradigm and has a history and has a vernacular and has its proponents and detractors and has its vocabulary and has its some of its commercialized logos, and as does Waldorf, they've got the OSNA and et cetera, et cetera. But it also has I think, this is me editorializing, we run the risk of using it as a foil And I'll give an example. I'm not talking about the windfoil that we've been experiencing. That's much more fun. A foil of an excuse or something to hide behind. So I've had experiences where, we were at work having a conversation about, well, why doesn't this happen? Why don't we do this? And someone will say, well, we're IB. Okay. But we're IB, it covers that. It's like, well, why aren't we celebrating, I remember conversations about why aren't we celebrating, the same, whether it's African American History Month or Hispanic Heritage, whatever, depending on what time of the year it is, et cetera. And some of the responses are like, we're IB. It's just, it's embedded, and so you think, okay, so is it really embedded? Are we aware that it's embedded? Are we conscious of that? Or is that a foil? Is that just an easy excuse, something to hide behind? And does that happen in the Waldorf world? I mean, I in my limited experience and my interactions with, even at my daughter's previous Waldorf school, there would be responses to things that would be like, well, I was always curious about math instruction, for example, like what point am I going to get some assessment results so that I can at least see where my daughter is trending before she goes to high school, in a public high school? And we're Waldorf, we don't really assess, and I just felt like it was a foil, and I was actually borne out. In my theory, it was borne out because we had no idea where she was, and my daughter's very academically capable and was able to catch up and go on and has done very well, but not every family also has the resources to be able to support a student in that case, and so do you see sometimes the "we are Waldorf" or "that's not Waldorf" as being like tantamount to the woman going, well, I've heard that if you have a bad thought, I'm like thinking, if that's the case, there would be 0.0 people working in Waldorf schools.
Right.
So then that pretty much today's conversation is
over.
Oh, I just had a bad thought. I got to turn off the thing. So do you ever see that? Do you see that happening?
Of course. Unfortunately, that exact thing happens in Waldorf schools. It shouldn't. And I think it was maybe the exception at the Santa Fe Waldorf School with certain individuals. I don't recall anything like that happening in the high school, for instance, but I know that did occur. And yeah, that's not acceptable to the parents who are hearing that.
No, because at a certain point, the realities of a competition and a market, especially if you're in the private sector where you're competing with free and other options that may cost more or less and maybe delivering different measurable results, and maybe marketing that, that's a reality. I don't know if that's what partially contributed to the Waldorf School in Santa Fe not being in existence, but small schools typically live and die by enrollment.
Right.
That's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You mentioned this idea of, well, it's IB, so that's like right there. There's no interrogation. There are no interrogatives that follow, and that's really unhealthy.
Yeah.
And I was in Denver a few weeks ago talking to a friend, and we got talking about a lot of different things, and she started talking about Daniel Pink, who's a lauded author, an incredible person, New York Times bestsellers, Power of Regret, many amazing books. And
are you Googling that right now, Pete?
I just wanted to make sure that I had what the book was right. I thought he wrote something that was the power.
He wrote. He has a great book, I think, called something about in the right mind or something. He talks about the power. the fact that the future will be people who are right brained.
Correct.
I don't remember. I'm messing
Correct.
up the name because I'm not cheating now on my Google.
So,
but anyway,
so a whole new mind.
a whole new mind. That's what it is.
And right. And so his whole thing is right. You don't go home on the weekend and do accounting. You go home on the weekend if you want to do something. You play guitar, you read a book, you run, you work out. You don't go and like crunch numbers. So it's the right left brain thing. Anyway, that's what he was talking about. But my point was that my friend was telling me she had worked with Daniel Pink and knew him and is a friend of his. And I said, he seems like such an amazing guy. And she was like, yeah. So nonetheless, I said, what's he like? And she said, well, first, he's brilliant, super kind. And she said he's interested in everything. Like would never give a pat and it's IB or that's just the way it is.
Right.
Really tell me more. What question? Tell me more about that. And I think that has led to him being able to impart so much wisdom. And so nothing stagnates then, right? And there's always new topics he's taking on and talking about. And I think school movements, educational models have to do that. Otherwise they become stagnant and then they're calcified and then they're not alive, right? That life force thing we were talking about is gone, and that's a danger.
Yeah. It was interesting that you bring that up. I was, for the listeners, we've been on this little trip and, as brothers, we've been we don't spend that much time together because we're geographically separated. And I've been really, in addition to wanting to spend time with my brothers, but fascinated by this concept of really taking it one amount of time a year to try to learn something new that's really challenging, that's hard, that's not in our normal wheelhouse where we can do it reflexively. Like we're all at a point in our careers or wherever we are that there's a lot that we do that we've put in our 10,000 hours and we're kind of there and we can do it efficiently and effectively. But if we stop learning, then we don't grow and expand. So today I'm getting my derriere dragged through the water behind a jet ski as we were both doing alternately. And my instructor, shout out to Rodrigo.
Go Rodrigo.
Go to Rodrigo. So we're on a foil. And so to describe it, it's almost like an oversized boogie board. And then it has a kind of a rudder, like a post that goes down under the water about 3 feet. And then there's a smaller fin under there that runs parallel to the board. And so when you reach a certain speed and you do some techniques that I was having a tough time doing today, it actually comes up out of the water. And then you have an incredible sensation of flying. And so I was just getting rolled and flipping and falling. And the very first time I did exactly what you're not supposed to do, I crashed and my face came up and the sharp part of the foil was right in front of my head and all this stuff. And so I paused and I'm like floating out there going, I may be just too old for this. Like, it's like wearing me out and I'm in good shape, but it's all new muscles, all new learning. I'm overthinking and I'm questioning myself. And he comes over and he shuts off the jet ski and he says, hey, I just turned 50 and I make a commitment every year. I'm either going to learn a new language, I'm going to learn a new sport, or I'm going to learn a new skill. And I'm thinking, all right, that's that trying to learn something. And, we don't all need to carve out time and go to another country to do it either. Right. It's like, even I was reading that if you start brushing your teeth with your left hand as opposed to your right-handed hand, if you're right-handed, no, seriously, or you start doing things with the other hand, even from a biological standpoint, it starts to kind of rewire your brain, keeps you flexible. And that's obviously a lot easier to do than to learn a new language or something.
Daniel Pink would support that too.
Yeah, I'm sure he would. In fact, I might have probably stolen it from one of his. In fact, I'd love to have Daniel Pink on the podcast. He's one of my absolute all-time dream guests. So if you can hook it up through your friend to Daniel Pink, Daniel, I'll give you the questions in advance and however long you want to talk or not, we're good to go.
Fantastic.
I want to, we've spent a lot of time talking about Waldorf education, and I want to kind of go up on the foil, get up out of the water, rise up above a little bit and look more globally on a couple questions. You guys have been generous with your time already, and I really appreciate that. I just have some questions, kind of philosophical questions, and see what your thoughts on this are. What does academic rigor mean? Academic rigor. These are terms that are thrown out in education in general, either when people are selecting schools for their kids, certain socioeconomic and other education level. Parents will go, I need an academically rigorous background for my kid, my child. They're going to go on. They're going to do this. I want to make sure they're prepared for the next level. So those are those questions. Sometimes when teachers are being evaluated, there's the questions about academic rigor. Sometimes teachers in the staff room look over at the work that's generated by kids in another teacher's classroom, and they think there's either too much or not enough academic rigor. What does academic rigor mean? How do you define it?
I think it would have different definitions depending on who you ask.
This is you guys.
Yeah.
Asking
I think that for me, teaching high school, I think academic rigor most importantly meant that all of the students could strive for something, that even the most capable of the students would be interested and engaged and active participants in a course. That was most important for me.
So really tailoring your instruction to a wide range of learners.
Yeah, because and some people might say, no, it's all about standards. You have to have a standard, and you have to have a certain amount of homework, let's say, and things like that. And that might be part of it, but if half of the class can't rise to that, then there's really no point. But the ones who can, they need to keep getting fed.
We call that differentiated instruction in the public school world.
Yeah.
And by the way, for listeners, you can go back and listen to the Dr. Doug Fisher episode where we talk about the research behind homework and the value of homework. And it's in terms of an effect size on learning outcomes, homework has a really small effect size. Whether it has to do with it, and there's some exceptions. There's one about literacy and reading practice under certain conditions, but most of it is really, really minimal effect sizes. And homework has historically been something that has been, I would call it a false proxy for rigor. You can load a kid up with a bunch of stuff, and parents will go, I went to bed at 11 and Johnny was burning them. Yeah. And it's like, okay. And he's copying textbook pages on history, and now he hates history. Congratulations on your fake rigor,
Damn sure.
Or at the lower elementary level, a lot of parents, especially again, parents who are educated or parents who have the time in their work schedule, and you got, parents doing the work for the kids. Right. And so there's a lot of those things that happen. So I appreciate that, Chris, kind of a differentiated access. And that's the challenge. That's the art and the science of teaching, right? Is like, how do you do that? We're even seeing that with the lessons we've been taking, right? These teachers who we hire to help us learn to kite surf, for example, and when there's enough wind or do this foiling, we may have more or less ability, than other people. We're not in our 20s anymore. We may overthink things. We may be afraid of getting injured. I know, actually, no, we are afraid of getting injured. That's part of it too. And they may teach us, and then they may go on to a 18-year-old who's been, surfing and snowboarding for the last 5 years, and they'll hop right up.
Sure.
And they also then have to be challenged, right? They can't just tow them around on their stomach like they were doing with us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What about you, Pete? How do you define academic rigor without looking it up on Google? Right.
I'm not looking it up. I'm writing notes while you're talking about what to say. Well, so I think that's a great question. You answered it with the technical term. You said something really good about it. And I just wanted to say this is like the foil when you're up riding, maybe not quite in the water, but, the difference between, like you were saying, this attentiveness and engagement. And it is huge, right? A lot of students are attentive in a classroom, but are they really engaged in the learning process? And same thing with homework. Are they engaged in the learning process while they're doing their homework? Or are they getting it done and not paying any attention and trying to be as efficient as they can? So I think the element of engagement is really important versus just attentiveness or kind of going and doing the bare minimum. And I would say that in an academic sense, that's the same thing. In a Waldorf setting, which is my obviously field of expertise, you have the holistic approach of Waldorf education gives a lot of opportunity for people to be engaged in a lot of different things, not just kind of passively attentive. And I think that actually wires them to remain engaged in those things tangentially, perhaps, but then they can return to them. But it also teaches them the difference between true engagement versus just kind of passive attentiveness. So I would say that academic rigor, connected to academics specifically, is the ability for students to remain engaged, which is the job of the teacher. And you do that in a myriad of ways. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and I appreciate both of your perspectives. It's something that, over my career, especially the last decade or so, in my current role, periodically it'll come up, or in mission and vision statements, or in board comments, or parent complaints there's a lack of rigor, right. Like. Everyone's got a different perspective, and as Chris said, a different understanding of what rigor is. For some people, it's most easily quantified by number of hours that a student spends on their work, homework, number of pages they need to read, et cetera. And for others, it's how deeply they think about things. So there is no simple answer to this. I just have two more questions for both of you. They're reflective questions. They're future facing. The first one is, what does your 50-year-old self, or almost 50-year-old self in Chris's case, what would your 50-year-old self tell your 20-year-old self that you wish you'd known when you were 20? Like, if you could flash back 30 years, what would you whisper in your 20-year-old self's ear? About life, about career, about teaching, about education, about buying Apple stock and investing in this strange company that has a blue, buying the URL for Google, but misspelled by one letter. So you can, no. There's a company's going to come out. It's a little blue bird. Eventually it's going to be bought by a guy who's going to change it to an X. But before that, no.
It's going to tweet.
It's going to go, okay, dude.
Yeah.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Great question. A few things come to mind. One of them is simply that
your hair will go away.
I already knew that at 20.
Fabio, what was that guy? I can't believe it's not butter.
It's Fabio.
Fabio, yeah, because Chris had the Fabio thing going for a while. Remember that?
Yeah. So, one of them would be what you choose to do to make a living doesn't define you. And so the most important thing to remember is that it's the journey that's important, the journey of life. And because I think a lot of 20-year-olds, and I certainly did, worry about finding the right career, finding the right thing to do, and what is it, and then once maybe you find it, then how do you get into it, and how do you start, and all of those questions, and then at the point where I am now, that doesn't matter so much, and it's more about finding the things that make me happy and support me and my family and all of that. What you do doesn't necessarily define you and who you are, and it's the journey that's important in life.
Pete?
Wow, that's a hard one to follow, Chris.
You can't Google this, dude. If you Google it, it's going to come out. AI,
Google.
ChatGPT. 10
ChatGPT.
things my 50-year-old self would tell my 20-year-old.
First of all, you will feel much older.
First of all, everything will hurt. No.
So, I mean, absolutely, that's really well said. I agree entirely with those statements. I think I would say to myself, look, the key to life is not perfection. The key to life is not getting it right, quote unquote. It's just doing your best again and again and again. And know that every time something doesn't go the way that you think, you just have to keep pushing through and do your best. So definitely that dovetails with it's the journey, not the destination. There is no destination possible, right? Unless you're talking a specific place in the physical realm. I need to get to La Ventana. Okay, we're here. But in terms of who we are, that's always changing. And then I think the other thing I would say is, look, the ultimate challenge is going to be parenting and doing the best you can as a parent for your children, because they are the most important beings in your life. And
as Whitney Houston said.
Did she say that? Why don't you say
Children of the future.
Oh, so that would be something. And then that's where, of course, you do want, then you have to remind yourself it's not perfection as a parent, because we all in this room and
God
all
knows.
the millions and millions of listeners.
Wait, if you have
on
a
this
bad thought, you
podcast,
can't be a parent?
then I'd be out of the race
Whoa.
before it even started. But in all seriousness, right, that's the hardest one to remember, the mantra of it's not about, being a perfect parent. It's about doing the best and knowing that you are fallible and you're a human being, and it is the journey. And I'm just grateful for it. And also I would say gratitude is the attitude to employ. And if you have that, oh boy.
That's what rap sounds like when you grow up in New Jersey and you're 51. And yeah. Well, thank you both. My last one is this. We've been exposed to lots of teachers in our lives. Not all great. Some damaging. Some forgotten because they were just unremarkable, and some outstanding because we'll never forget the lessons from them. And whoever it is, we all have names in our minds from elementary school all the way up. We have, and some of them we share, some of them we differ on on our opinions, of them. And I have, and some of mine are no longer with us. Bonnie Chauncey was very influential with me as an English teacher in middle school and in high school. She's no longer with us. The David Sloans, the John Wolsons, who we had different experiences with them and different times, and college professors who we had, coaches who we had, etc. And we carry those thoughts and impetuses with us, whether we're conscious or not. We remember times when they put their arm on our shoulder and were like, "Hey, you can do this. I have faith." Or that you get tapped for a lead role in a play when you didn't think you were the one to do it, or whatever the case is. How would you both like to be remembered by your students 50 years in the future? I'm assuming you guys are very healthy, but you might not make it to 100. So let's just assume that you tap out at 99. How do you want to be remembered by your students?
I would like to say that the students have been my greatest teachers, along with my daughters, and Susan Filari, Jane Wolson, many, many others, John Wolson as well, encouraging me, David Sloan, yes, Lenore Richer. I would say that I want to be remembered as doing my best.
Will Kiesel on the basketball court.
Will Kiesel on the basketball.
Instead of saying numeric, he would say it's pneumatic. And all I could think of is there's like pressure in a cylinder. This play is pneumatic. Sorry.
And I was going to say Larry Johnson, but that wasn't his name. Remember our art teacher? Larry Johnson was a UNLV basketball player with Stacey Augman, who came into the league years ago. Larry,
I remember his first name. Tall guy, played
tall
basketball.
Guy, beard, red hair.
Yeah.
His kid was
We
Chris.
mentioned him yesterday.
Yeah, it'll come out.
Okay.
Maybe we'll put it in the show notes. Shout out.
Young.
Larry.
Thank you. Larry Young.
I don't know if he.
Larry Young.
And I think, I don't want to cut off your train of thought, but one reason that I even bring this up is because I'm not even sure how many of these people are still
with us
around, right?
Yeah.
And so life goes by quickly.
Sure. So all those people I mentioned, the classes I've taught, the students who taught me, but I think I would like to be remembered as being somebody who was, striving to do my best, fallible, interested, engaged, and
occasionally with a bad thought.
Occasionally with a bad thought or two, but really wanted to show that enthusiasm and engagement in the lives of others and in social interactions is where I feel fortunate, and I hope that all the people I've touched, my students, would say, okay, I want to be enthusiastic and engaged in a similar level to how Peter Sciarretta was.
Chris?
Yeah, hopefully they'll remember me as being supportive and encouraging, and also as someone who was excited to learn alongside them and that they could see learning with them, and someone who maybe opened some doors to them in terms of bringing something that was new and exciting and interesting to them sometimes.
Well, I want to thank both of you. I'm not suggesting you're not going to make it to 100, but I do appreciate that and the conversation today. And it's really been a privilege to have both of you on the Hangout and to spend this time together. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you both of you.
Thank you for listening to the Superintendent's Hangout. You can follow me on Twitter at DVS1970. Please be sure to share this show with friends and family on social media and in the real world. Thank you to Brad Bacayal for editing and production assistance, and to Tina Royster for scheduling and logistics. Thanks for hanging out, and have a great day.